Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe in. Feel the rhythm of your chest, the pulse that quietly reminds you that you are here, in this instant. But ask yourself, what is an instant? When did now begin, and when will it end? We live surrounded by clocks, calendars, schedules, as though time were a cage we willingly step into each day. Yet when you sit still, when silence settles around you, doesn't time feel softer, stranger, almost like a dream unraveling in slow motion? Some say time is real, the spine of the universe, the framework upon which all existence unfolds. But others whisper something far more unsettling, that time is not out there, it is in here, within the folds of your mind. That it is memory, expectation, and perception, stitched together to create the illusion of movement. Think about it. The past exists only as shadows in your memory, the future only as sparks of imagination. And the present? The present slips away the very moment you notice it. So what then are we clinging to when we say time? Tonight, let us wander together into this enigma. Not as students of science, not as philosophers lost in books, but as travelers listening to the heartbeat of existence. Tonight, I want you to feel time, not measure it, to hold its mystery like a flame cupped in your hands. Stay with me, because the question before us is not just whether time is real. The deeper question is this: if time is an illusion, then what are we? Imagine the very first breath you ever took. Not the memory of it, because none of us can remember our first cry, but the idea of it. The moment your lungs filled with air for the very first time, and your life began to flow forward. For you, that was the birth of time. Before that, in the warm silence of the womb, there was no past and no future, only a drifting eternity. And in that truth, we see something profound. Time is not simply measured by the ticking of a cosmic clock. It is born in the act of noticing change. When your body felt air, when your ears were filled with sound, when your eyes first learned to drink in light, time began not as a law of the universe, but as an awakening inside you. But here is the enigma. Before there was a you, time still existed, or at least we believe it did. The universe spun on its axis. Stars burned and collapsed. Galaxies danced in their endless spirals. Billions of years passed before human eyes ever opened. And yet, without anyone to witness them, can we say those years were truly time, or only events, scattered like pages without a reader? You see, the first breath of time is not only a story of biology, but of perception. Each of us carries our own private stream of time. The seconds that race when you are nervous, the hours that drag when you are lonely, the days that vanish when you are in love. Time bends itself around your emotions, your memories, your very state of being, which means the universe is not ruled by a single clock, but by countless inner metronomes, all ticking to rhythms of their own. Close your eyes now and think back, not to your first breath, but to your earliest memory. Perhaps it is blurry, perhaps it is strange. In that memory lies the seed of your personal timeline, the beginning of your private story. Everything before it, though real in the physical sense, feels like a myth to you, because for your consciousness, time began the moment memory began. So what is the first breath of time? For the universe, perhaps it was the Big Bang, the explosion that birthed energy, matter, and motion. For you, it was the cry that drew air into your lungs. And for consciousness itself, it was the first spark of awareness that dared to ask, what is happening to me? Where am I? What is this? And so we find ourselves at the edge of a paradox. Time feels both universal and intimate, eternal and deeply personal. It began with the cosmos, yes, but it also begins anew every time a soul awakens to existence. Picture the first humans gazing at the sky. No calendars, no ticking hands, no hours or minutes. Only the eternal dome above, painted with stars that shifted from night to night. For them, time was not something measured. It was something felt. The chill that came with dusk, the warmth that returned with dawn, the cycles of the moon guiding the tides. In those ancient nights, time was alive, breathing in the rhythm of nature itself. And yet, as humanity grew restless, as we began to till the soil and gather in tribes, a hunger arose, a need to trap the invisible, to carve the flow of time into something we could count, something we could own. So we turned to the sky, and the sky became our first clock. The rising and setting of the sun, the journey of constellations, the steady return of the seasons, all of these were our earliest measurements. but it was never enough. For the human heart, time moves differently. For a lover waiting, the night is endless. For a child running through fields, the day is gone in a blink. The sky gave us cycles, but it could not tame the elasticity of time as we feel it. And so came the first shadows cast by sundials, stone markers, sticks planted into the earth, following the light as it shifted. From there, water clocks dripping steadily, each drop marking a piece of the infinite. Later, sand sliding through glass, an hour sealed within a fragile vessel. Each invention whispered the same desperate truth. We were not content to live inside time, we wanted to command it. But with this mastery came a curse. The moment we divided life into hours and minutes, we lost something sacred. We no longer rose only with the sun or rested with the stars. We began to race against our own inventions, living not in the rhythm of nature, but in the rhythm of numbers. And yet, isn't there a strange beauty in this? Humanity, small and fragile, dared to challenge the vastness of eternity with a stick in the dirt, a bowl of dripping water, a turning wheel of gears. It is as if we could not bear the thought that time might slip through our fingers unnoticed. So we chose to give it shape, to cage it in symbols, to make it ours. Still, beneath every ticking clock, beneath every digital countdown glowing in blue, lies the same truth. Time does not care for our measurements. The sun rises whether or not we mark it. The stars shift whether or not we record them. And when you close your eyes at night, when silence erases the tick of the clock, you return, if only for a moment, to the original state, the timelessness of being. So perhaps the invention of clocks was not a way to capture time, but to comfort ourselves, to convince our restless hearts that the endless, mysterious river can be divided into neat little boxes, that we can hold the infinite in our fragile hands. But here's the question that lingers. Did we invent clocks to measure time, or to protect ourselves from the fear that time might not exist at all? Close your eyes for a moment and drift backward through your memories. You might not recall the day you were born, but you can trace threads leading you back. Your childhood home, the scent of meals shared at a table, the first time you felt joy, the first time you felt grief. Each memory feels like a bead on a necklace, strung together in a line that convinces you of continuity. But here is the secret. It is not time that builds this necklace. It is memory. Without memory, time collapses. Think of a dream. In the moment, it feels vast, endless. You move through scenes, conversations, places, but when you wake, the thread is broken. You cannot tell whether the dream lasted seconds or hours. Time in a dream does not exist because memory cannot hold it. What you are left with are scattered fragments, a few images, a lingering emotion. And suddenly, what felt like a whole story evaporates into mist. In this way, memory is not just a companion to time. It is the very skeleton that gives time shape. Without it, there is no past. Without anticipation, which is memory projected forward, there is no future. What remains is only the eternal present, slipping away moment by moment. Think of someone who suffers from amnesia. To them, life becomes a blur. Without the ability to recall yesterday, what is today but a floating island, unanchored? Every experience is isolated, sealed in a bubble of now. For such a person, time does not stretch or bend. It simply resets, like a flame constantly reigniting without a trail of smoke behind it. And here's where the paradox deepens. If memory is the architect of time, then time is not an objective thing at all. It is a construction, a delicate weaving of experience, stitched together by consciousness. Two people may live the same span of years, but if one's life is filled with rich, vivid memories, and the other's with dull repetition, their timelines will feel utterly different. Time expands when memory is dense. It contracts when memory is sparse. Think of your own life. Childhood summers that seem to last forever, filled with new experiences every day. Compare that to adulthood, where routines blur weeks into months. The reason time feels faster as we age is not because the clock changes, but because memory stops collecting as many unique impressions. The more familiar life becomes, the fewer anchors memory builds. And without anchors, time rushes past us like a river we cannot slow. Now let us imagine, what if memory is not just a record of time, but the very fabric of it? Imagine each memory as a thread and your consciousness as the weaver. You build the tapestry as you go, and then you walk across it, believing the path was always there. But what if, without you weaving it, time would not exist at all? What if the past is only as real as the strength of your memory, and the future only as real as your imagination can stretch? This realization can be frightening, but also liberating. Because if time is built within us, then each moment is not a prisoner of the clock, but a creation of the mind. When you truly immerse yourself in a single experience, listening to a song, holding someone's hand, watching the ocean, time seems to pause. Not because the world has stopped, but because your memory has turned that instant into something eternal. And here lies the heart of the enigma. Perhaps time is not a river carrying us forward, but a mosaic of moments, each etched into memory like glass pieces in a stained window. You are not swept along helplessly. You are the one arranging the pieces, giving them meaning, calling them past or future. So the next time you feel time slipping away too quickly, remember this: time is not lost. It is written within you, in the quiet archives of your mind. Every smile you've shared, every sorrow you've carried, every breath you've taken, they are not gone. They are preserved, shaping the way you feel the present and dream the future. Which brings us back to the haunting question. If time is memory, and memory is fragile, then what happens when the memory fades? Does time itself die with it? Or does it continue on, unbothered, in some place we cannot see? Take a moment and try to hold on to now. Really try. Listen to the sound around you. Feel the air against your skin. Hear my voice weaving through your thoughts. You might think you are in the present, but by the time you notice it, it's already gone. The instant you name now, it has slipped into memory. The present is like a flame that disappears the moment you try to cup it in your hands. It is an edge, a knife-thin line between what has already happened and what is still to come. And yet, we spend our entire lives searching for it, longing to be in the moment, as if it were a place we could live. But here is the mystery. Does the present even exist? Physics suggests that time may not be a flowing river at all, but a block, past, present, and future, all equally real, all existing simultaneously. If that is true, then the present is nothing more than a spotlight, our consciousness scanning across the surface of eternity. Wherever the light lands, we call that now. But the rest, the vast shadows of what has been and what will be, is still there, waiting. Think of how quickly a sound fades. A note is struck on a piano, and in less than a breath it dissolves into silence. Yet in that note you hear music, and in that music you feel beauty. Was the beauty in the present, or was it in the lingering echo, the memory you carried just milliseconds after the note vanished? Consider your heartbeat. Each pulse sustains you, yet you only ever feel it as it leaves. You cannot catch it in the instant it happens. You are always half a step behind your own body. Even your vision is delayed. What you see before your eyes happened milliseconds ago, light already traveled, signals already processed. Which means the present is always a reconstruction, a ghost of what has already passed. And yet, despite this, the present feels like the most precious thing we have. We build philosophies around it. Live in the now, be mindful, savor the moment. Perhaps not because the present exists, but because it doesn't. Because it is the one thing we can never hold, we worship it all the more. Like lovers who know their time is short, we cherish every second precisely because it slips away. But imagine, for a moment, that there is no present at all, only memory and anticipation, only past and future, stitched so tightly together that what we call now is merely the seam between them. How differently would you live if you knew this? Would you cling less to the illusion, or love it more fiercely because of its fragility? Maybe the truth is this: the present is not a destination, but an act of noticing. It is not a room you can enter, but a flame you can witness before it fades. To be in the present is not to stop time, but to acknowledge its passing, and to realize that even as it slips through your fingers, you are alive, awake, and here. So the present, in all its impossibility, becomes the greatest gift of all. Not because it is real, but because it reminds us how precious it is to exist in a world where moments can vanish, yet still mean everything. Close your eyes and picture tomorrow. Maybe you see yourself walking into work, or sipping your morning tea, or meeting someone you love. Maybe you imagine something grander, a version of yourself you have not yet become, standing in a place you've never been. Whatever you see, Notice this truth. It is not real. It has no substance except the flicker of neurons in your mind. The future is the greatest phantom of all, a place we visit daily, though our feet never truly walk there. Every plan you make, every hope you hold, every fear you carry lives in this ghostly land. And yet, this ghost has more power over your life than almost anything else. For though it does not exist, it shapes every decision you make in the present. Consider this. The future is nothing more than imagination built upon memory. You know the sun will rise tomorrow not because you've seen tomorrow, but because you've seen it rise countless times before. You expect the world to continue its rhythm because memory tells you it has always done so. But there is no guarantee. Tomorrow is a promise that has never been kept until it arrives. Think of all the futures you have imagined in your life, the childhood dreams of what you might become, the teenage visions of love, of freedom, of who you thought you'd be by now. Some of those futures blossomed into reality, others withered into nothing. And yet, each one shaped you. Even the futures that never came to pass still guided your choices, still sculpted the path beneath your feet. But here lies the paradox. Though the future is only imagination, it feels more real than the past at times. A memory can fade, distort, even betray you. But the future glows with possibility, untouchable and pure. You can dream it however you wish, reshape it endlessly, live in it without consequence. It is a canvas on which you paint with the colors of desire and fear. Still, there is danger here, because we can become prisoners of the future, just as we are prisoners of the past. We can lose ourselves in what might be, forgetting what is. We can chain our happiness to a version of tomorrow that may never arrive. And when tomorrow finally comes, it never looks quite like the picture we carried. The future, like a mirage, always recedes just out of reach. Yet, is that not also its beauty? If the future were fixed, if it were already written and unchangeable, hope would wither. But because the future is made of imagination, it is also made of freedom. Each choice you make redraws it. Each step you take reshapes its horizon. The future is not a place waiting for you. It is a landscape you create with every breath. And when you lie awake at night, your mind drifting into possibility, you are not wasting time. You are touching one of the most powerful tools consciousness has ever known. For without imagination, there would be no invention, no progress, no art, no love that dares to dream of forever. The future exists only in your mind. And yet, it has built civilizations, launched ships into the stars, and whispered courage into trembling hearts. So perhaps the future is not unreal, but differently real. It is not a location on the map of the universe, but a reflection in the mirror of your soul. When you imagine tomorrow, you are not looking ahead. You are looking inward at the endless potential hidden within you. And maybe that is the greatest enigma of all. The future is not something we are moving toward. It is something we are carrying with us every step of the way. Close your eyes and drift backward. Not just through memory, but through the weight of your own history. What do you see? Perhaps moments of joy that feel eternal, a childhood laughter, a face glowing in the golden light of yesterday. Or perhaps shadows rise instead, mistakes, regrets, losses that refuse to let go. This is the past, not as it was, but as you remember it. And that difference is the very heart of the enigma. The past, for each of us, feels like a sacred record, something fixed, something carved into stone. But science whispers something far more unsettling. Memory is fragile, pliable, shaped not only by what happened, but by the stories we tell ourselves about what happened. Each time you recall an event, your mind does not play back a recording. Instead, it rebuilds the memory, like a painter creating a new version of the same scene, adding colors, erasing lines, softening details. Over time, what you hold is not the event itself, but a story, crafted, retold, reshaped until it feels true. This is why two people can share the same moment, yet remember it so differently. For one, a day was joyous, for the other, painful. Each walked away carrying a different past, because the past is not a single thread, but countless threads woven through personal meaning. And here's the unsettling truth. Much of your identity, the very you believe in, is built upon these remembered stories. You say, I am this way because of what happened to me, or I am strong because I survived this, or I am broken because I lost that. But what if the past is less certain than you think? What if your life's foundation is not stone but sand, shifting every time you revisit it? Think of nostalgia. how it paints the past in soft hues, turning ordinary moments into treasures. Think of regret, how it sharpens one mistake until it pierces every corner of your memory. These emotions do not simply reflect the past. They reshape it. They make the past alive, breathing, evolving with you, which means the past is not gone at all. It is here, alive in your mind, a story constantly being retold. Now imagine this. If the past is only a story, then perhaps it can be rewritten. Perhaps you are not chained to it as tightly as you believe. You cannot change the events, but you can change the meaning you give them. A wound can become a lesson. A loss can become a memory of love. A failure can become the first step toward growth. In this way, the past is not a prison. It is clay in your hands, waiting to be reshaped. But there is danger too. If the past can be rewritten, it can also be distorted, manipulated, even weaponized. History itself, the great collective past of humanity, is not immune. Entire nations build identities on selective stories, choosing which parts to glorify, which to erase. And just as memory gives us a sense of self, history gives us a sense of belonging. But if both are stories, then both are fragile. Both can be lost. So what then is the past? Is it a sacred archive, locked and unchanging? Or is it a living narrative, shifting as we remember it? Maybe it is both. Maybe the past is the ground beneath us, but one that shifts slightly every time we dare to look down. And perhaps that is not a tragedy, but a gift. Because if the past is a story, then you are both its author and its reader. And with each telling, you are not only remembering who you were, but also discovering who you are becoming. So tonight, as we sit together in this quiet space, think of your past not as a cage, but as a library. Each memory is a book on the shelf, waiting to be revisited, reinterpreted, re-understood. You may not be able to change the ink on the page, but you can always change the way you read it. And in that subtle act of reframing, of retelling, you reclaim the power to decide how your story unfolds. The city did not rest. Even when the lamps dimmed and the factories stilled their iron lungs, something deeper stirred beneath its cobbled bones. The bridges that spanned its rivers and canals, once firm, now seemed to dissolve at their edges. Stone crumbling into mist, railings bending into air. A traveler would step upon them with certainty, only to find the planks groaning, the lines of mortar bleeding into shadow, as if the city itself wished to erase its own connections. These bridges had always been more than crossings of water. They were thresholds, between one district and another, between one way of thinking and the next, between waking and a kind of half-sleep. But lately, those who dared to walk them spoke of strange sensations. A sudden vertigo, as though the river beneath were not water at all, but some vast and liquid memory. A chill, not of weather, but of being seen. And worst of all, a whispering, softer than footsteps, yet clear enough to coil around the heart, urging the listener to pause, to step back, to not cross at all. Yet life demanded passage. The baker's apprentice must carry bread to the markets across the canal. The scholar must cross to reach the library at dawn. Lovers must risk the trembling arches to meet in secret at midnight. Each crossing became a gamble, a test of trust in the city's fading veins. For some, the bridges held, groaning like old men but steady enough. For others, the stones melted beneath their soles, and they were seen no more. Fishermen downstream swore they never pulled up a body, only nets tangled with scraps of parchment, locks of hair, fragments of faces. It was as though the bridges led, not from here to there, but from here to elsewhere, a place beyond names, a place that looked back, and so the people began to mark their crossings with talismans, a string of beads tied to the railing, a coin tossed into the fogged water, a whispered prayer to no god they could name. Still, each dawn revealed new absences, a missing cart, a vanished child, a song cut short in the night. The bridges hung in silence, swaying slightly, their arches hollowed as though gnawed from within. Some claimed it was punishment, that the city had stretched too far, built too many links, sought too much union between what should remain apart. Others whispered it was not decay, but migration, that the bridges were tired of binding this world to itself and longed to find their true reflections elsewhere. You could almost believe it if you stood long enough at the water's edge, watching the arches fade into mist. For if you waited, if you let your eyes unfocus, you might see another city mirrored there, familiar yet not. A city where the bridges gleamed strong and whole, beckoning you across, promising not escape but exchange. A city that waited for its twin to fall. The rivers were once simple, cold arteries of water flowing faithfully through the city's heart. They carried barges, washed away refuse, reflected lanterns on festival nights. But after the bridges began to fade, the rivers themselves grew restless, as if their surfaces had learned a new language, one written not in ripples but in revisions. Those who gazed too long into the currents began to notice the strangeness. A fisherman swore he saw his own reflection, but younger, with unlined skin and eyes full of laughter he no longer remembered. A seamstress leaned over the railing and found not herself but a stranger who wore her face, yet smiled in ways she never had. Children, daring each other, peered into the black water and screamed, for their reflections refused to mimic them, choosing instead to walk away, dissolving into streets unseen. It became clear that the rivers no longer mirrored what was, but what could have been, or what never was at all. Their surfaces rewrote memory, bending the familiar into drafts of unreality. They showed wounds uninflicted, joys unlived, deaths unexperienced. It was as though the water had become a manuscript of possibilities, endlessly editing the truth. Some were drawn to it, unable to resist. Men who had lost everything leaned over the banks, whispering bargains to the shadows beneath. Women who longed for forgotten loves reached down with trembling hands, believing they could touch what was taken. There were stories of people stepping into the water, not drowning but vanishing, as though absorbed into some draft of the world where they belonged more fully. But others recoiled in terror, for the rivers had begun to rewrite not just reflections, but reality itself. Streets near the banks shifted overnight. Houses lost doors, gained windows, changed their colors as though painted by unseen hands. A merchant found that his shop, which had always stood by the western quay, now faced east, and none of his neighbors remembered it otherwise. A child was born with two names, each etched into the city's ledgers, though only one mouth spoke them. The rivers did not flow toward the sea anymore, or at least not entirely. Maps showed them bending in directions no cartographer could chart, doubling back into alleys, pouring into wells, vanishing beneath archways only to emerge miles away. They seemed less like waters and more like veins of thought, threading through the city's mind, rewriting the boundaries between what was dreamt and what was lived. And every night, their whispers grew louder, not the sound of water over stone, but of sentences being crossed out and rewritten, of pages turned and torn. It was the sound of a story refusing to settle, a life refusing to be final. Those who lingered by the riverbanks too long came away changed. Their eyes flickered with doubt, as if they were no longer certain which version of themselves they inhabited. Some forgot their names, others gained new ones. A few spoke in voices not entirely their own, carrying with them words that belonged to no tongue known in the city. The council debated draining the rivers, damming them, severing their flow, but no plan succeeded. For the rivers no longer belonged to earth or stone. They belonged to something larger, something watching. To dam them would be to deny not water, but the rewriting of the world itself. And the rivers, in their endless revision, would not allow erasure. At first, the city streets twisted in small betrayals. A corner you knew by heart stretched a little longer. A familiar alley narrowed until you had to turn sideways to pass. Cobblestones seemed to shift places overnight, so that a path you could walk blindfolded now felt uncertain beneath your feet. People muttered about poor memory, about the tricks of fatigue, but soon the changes grew bolder. One morning, a scholar left her house on Lantern Row to find that her door no longer opened to her street, but to an entirely different quarter of the city. She stepped into an unfamiliar plaza where her neighbors swore she had always lived. Another night, a baker walked home and discovered that his shop had migrated 2 blocks away, the sign swinging gently in the wrong district as if it had always been there. The city, it seemed, had learned to fold itself like parchment, reshuffling its pieces at will. The streets bent like rivers now, curling into themselves, doubling back, then splitting apart again. Roads that once ended in quiet cul-de-sacs suddenly opened into vast boulevards where no such space had ever existed. Bridges led not across rivers, but into shadows that stretched impossibly long before spitting travelers out in districts they swore had been elsewhere. A boy followed the sound of bells and found himself in a cathedral no map had ever recorded, its spire stabbing a sky only he seemed able to see. The disorientation was cruel. Lovers agreed to meet at the fountain, only to discover there were now 3 fountains, where once there had been one. each insisting on its authenticity. Merchants brought carts of goods to the market square, but half of them vanished into corridors that looped endlessly back, like snakes biting their tails. Some citizens claimed the city was growing larger, expanding with each fold, while others insisted it was shrinking, collapsing inward into some tighter knot of streets. Both were correct, and neither. It wasn't just geography that shifted, it was memory. People swore their families had always lived on certain streets that no longer existed, yet they remembered the smell of bread rising from ovens that had vanished, the voices of neighbors whose names the city no longer allowed them to recall. Others found new memories seeded in their minds. Childhoods on roads that had never been there. First kisses under non-existent lamplights. Wars fought in avenues no historian recognized. The folds did not only warp space, they rewrote the very stories that anchored the citizens to themselves. Some adapted. Wanderers roamed the shifting veins of the city with delight, claiming that each fold was an invitation to a new world. They mapped not the geography, but the pattern of the folds, whispering that if you learned to read the rhythm, you could step through the labyrinth into eras and places far beyond the city's walls. They called themselves the walkers between pages, for they believed the city was no longer stone and mortar, but a book endlessly rewriting itself, and that walking its streets was like reading between lines. But others broke beneath the weight of it. Parents searched for children who slipped into wrong folds, never returning. Entire households were swallowed when their street folded upon itself, leaving nothing but the echo of voices behind shuttered windows. There were rumors of streets that led not to other streets, but to abysses, black corridors that ended in silence too thick to breathe. The council tried again to anchor the city. They drove great stakes into the ground, built arches to fix doorways into permanence, poured molten iron into the cracks between stones. Yet each morning, the folds returned, sometimes undoing the council's efforts, sometimes incorporating them in strange ways. An arch intended to bind two alleys became instead a frame to nowhere, its shadow falling upon a wall of sky. The citizens began to suspect the truth. The city was not failing, it was evolving. It was no longer bound to the logic of maps. It was becoming conscious, bending its skeleton to some rhythm only it could hear. And as the streets folded, one question crept like ivy through every whispered conversation. If the city itself is alive, then whose dream are we walking through? The first sign was subtle, barely more than a hiccup in the city's breath. A bell tower rang the hour of dusk, and yet the sun hung high as if mocking it. Citizens checked their hourglasses, their water clocks, the delicate bronze gears of pocket timepieces, and none agreed. One neighbor swore it was morning, another insisted it was night, while the baker at the corner stall declared the day had already passed twice. At first, it seemed a mere error, a slip of gears, an oversight. But then the hours began to loop. A woman stirred her tea, set it aside to cool, and when she reached again for the cup, she found herself stirring the tea anew, steam rising as if she had never touched it. A man kissed his wife goodbye, walked down the crooked lane toward the market, only to return and find himself once again at the threshold, lips brushing hers as if for the very first time. Their memories remained intact, but the world itself pressed rewind. Children laughed at the phenomenon. They ran through the loops, repeating pranks and games with gleeful abandon, perfecting the timing of every mischievous act. They would topple a fruit cart, watch the apples scatter, and then wait eagerly for the hour to snap back, allowing them to do it again with greater precision. For them, time's fracture was a toy, but for the rest, it was torment. Farmers tilled the same field endlessly, sweat and blisters resetting with the stroke of an unseen quill. Lovers confessed, only to be dragged backward to the silence that came before courage. The elderly, who measured their days like fragile glass, felt cheated as the sands of their hourglasses slid backward, refusing to let them move on. Worse still were the moments that repeated with cruelty. A widow found herself living again and again the exact hour of her husband's collapse. The gasp, the fall, the stillness, and though she screamed, though she tore her clothes, though she begged the river or the streets to take her, the hour always began again. Her grief became a circle with no exit. The scholars, desperate to explain, spoke of the city's folds extending beyond stone and water, spilling now into time itself. Just as alleys rewrote their routes and rivers revised reflections, so too did the hours bend to some greater revision. They drew diagrams of spirals, endless loops curling into themselves, claiming that time was no longer a line but a labyrinth, and the citizens were rats within it. Yet the diagrams could not capture the truth, for time was not always kind enough to repeat. Sometimes it skipped. A man fell asleep at dawn and woke to find weeks had passed, his beard unshaven, his crops withered, his neighbors unrecognizing. Sometimes it overlapped, so that two versions of a person inhabited the same street, each equally convinced they were real, each carrying different memories of hours gone awry. People began to speak of shadow selves, doubles born of the loops, who whispered forgotten futures into the ears of their originals. Merchants suffered most. Markets collapsed under the weight of time's duplications, eggs rotting in baskets that had only moments before been fresh, coins multiplying in purses only to vanish in the next cycle. Prices meant nothing. Debt could not be calculated, for contracts signed in 1 hour might be unwritten in the next. Entire economies folded like paper under the thumb of a restless hand. And yet, in the midst of chaos, a quiet faith bloomed. Some citizens whispered that the loops were mercies, that the city was giving them second chances, third chances, countless chances, to speak the word unsaid, to mend the wound, to change the moment that broke them. They began to see the loops not as prisons, but as rehearsals, preparing them for some perfect alignment when the city would finally allow them to move forward. But others grew suspicious. What if the loops were not kindness but consumption? What if the city fed on repeated hours, on relived anguish and replayed joy, drawing strength from the endless circulation of time? What if every loop was not a gift, but a leash? And when the council called a gathering to discuss this, when every citizen crowded into the great square, a hush fell as the bells began to toll again. 1, 2, 3, and then, impossibly, backwards. 2, 1, 0, and silence. The square filled with dread as the citizens realized the hours no longer needed to move forward at all. It began with a snowfall in midsummer. White flakes drifted from a sky glowing with golden sun, melting as they touched the cobblestones yet never ceasing, a contradiction falling gently across the city's skin. Children squealed in delight, chasing the snow with bare arms, while their mothers clutched them close, whispering prayers. For no season had ever dared betray itself so openly. By dawn the next day, the trees bloomed again, blossoms unfurling in a single gasp of pink and white, carpeting the streets in petals that smelled of forgotten springs. Merchants set out their stalls beneath branches heavy with fruit, only to return the following morning and find those same branches stripped bare, their leaves crisp with autumn's fire. The city no longer turned with the earth, but with something else, something unbound by the rhythm of sun and moon. Entire days disappeared into strange weather. A fisherman left for the river in dawn's mist and came home through a storm of thunder and lightning, convinced he had been gone for weeks, though only hours had passed. Families prepared for festivals only to find themselves waking in midwinter, candles already burned down, tables already emptied, as though the season had celebrated itself without them. The betrayal cut deepest for those who measured their lives by seasons. Farmers wept as crops sprouted in frost and died beneath sudden heat. Midwives struggled, for children born beneath the wrong stars were said to carry unsettled destinies. Lovers who had pledged themselves in spring awoke the next day beneath a harvest moon, their vows soured by the city's cruel reordering of time. And yet, in these betrayals, strange wonders appeared. Birds arrived from nowhere, species no scholar could name, singing songs that bent the air. Flowers bloomed with colors unseen in memory, shades that made the eyes ache with awe. Fruits ripened that tasted of childhood dreams, of sorrows forgotten, of futures never lived. Some claimed that these seasons were gifts from other worlds, glimpses of climates not our own, stolen and sown into the city's soil. But not all gifts were gentle. There came a night when the city awoke to endless dusk. No sunrise, no stars, just a horizon burning dimly, as if the world itself had grown weary of light. Another morning, the air itself froze solid, hanging in glittering shards that clinked together when you walked through them, cutting skin like broken glass. And worst of all was the day of endless bloom, when every plant burst open at once, flooding the streets with pollen so thick that lungs collapsed and breath became impossible. The city's rivers turned yellow with it, choking on the abundance of a season gone mad. The council gathered once more, cloaks wrapped tight against the unpredictable weather, faces shadowed with dread. Some argued that the city was slipping into other calendars, aligning itself with worlds unseen. Others insisted it was punishment, that the betrayal of time had invited the betrayal of nature, and that the city was now a stage upon which forgotten gods rehearsed their chaos. But the oldest among them said nothing. They only sat quietly, eyes clouded, as if remembering winters that had never been, summers that never ended, autumns that bled into centuries. They alone seemed unsurprised, as though they had lived these betrayals before, in another fold of the city's dream. Meanwhile, the citizens grew weary. What did birthdays mean when the seasons themselves lied? What did years mean if age was no longer tethered to cycles of sun and harvest? Some woke young after sleeping old. Others aged decades overnight, their bones betraying them while their faces still looked like children. The city had severed itself from the world's clock. It had become a place with its own sky, its own calendar, its own relentless betrayals. And beneath the shifting seasons, a deeper question grew. If time could betray, and nature could betray, what other truths might yet dissolve? It began with a whisper, small enough to dismiss. A child asked for bread, yet her mother swore she had heard her say stone. A merchant promised silk, but his customers held wool in their hands. At first, it was blamed on distraction, on ears growing weary of the city's endless distortions. But soon, it became undeniable. Words themselves were shifting. The language that once stitched the city together had begun to fray. Familiar syllables soured in the mouth, bending into new sounds, new meanings. A greeting spoken at dawn became an insult by dusk. Prayers uttered in temples returned to the worshippers twisted, as though the gods themselves had forgotten their own names. Lovers whispered endearments only to watch their beloved recoil, hearing threats where affection had been meant. Names were the first to betray. A man who had always been called Elias awoke to find that even his wife, even his children, now called him Thorn. And though he screamed his true name into the river's rewriting currents, no one recognized it anymore. Streets too began to rename themselves. Plaques shifted overnight, inscriptions changing as though redrafted by unseen hands. Maps became lies before the ink could dry, but perhaps most cruel was the way memory bent beneath the shifting words. People swore they had always used the new names, always understood the altered meanings. Arguments broke out in marketplaces. "It has always meant this," one voice insisted, while another wept, clutching the remnants of a tongue they no longer recognized. Soon families stopped speaking aloud, fearing that words would betray them before the truth could be kept safe. Scholars tried to keep records, scribbling furiously every time a word changed, but their scrolls betrayed them too. Ink crawled across the parchment at night, rearranging letters, writing new definitions in margins the scholars had never made. Books became living things, rewriting themselves endlessly so that no story could be trusted, no history believed. A tale read in the morning was a different tale by night, its moral inverted, its heroes turned villains, its ending unwritten. There were those who embraced it. Poets spoke of the beauty of a language alive, a tongue that refused to die by staying still. They stood in squares, reciting words that shifted as they spoke, their verses evolving in the air, never the same twice, like rivers of sound. But for most, the instability was unbearable. Contracts dissolved, oaths lost meaning, promises curdled as their words twisted to mean their opposites. Worst of all was when silence itself betrayed them. One evening, a crowd gathered at the bell tower to watch the sunset, and as the final lights sank into the rivers, they opened their mouths, not to speak, but to breathe, and found that the silence between them had shape, had tone, had meaning. It was a silence that accused, a silence that wounded, a silence louder than words, carrying with it the weight of betrayals never voiced. Soon, people began to dream in foreign tongues, languages they had never studied, languages no scholar could decipher. Children babbled in syllables older than the city, while the elderly muttered in dialects not their own, their voices trembling with fear at the strangeness within. Some claimed these were not new words, but remembered ones, languages the city had spoken long before humans gave it names, now clawing their way back into air. And in the center of this chaos, one question rippled across every mind. If words themselves are no longer faithful, if names dissolve and meanings betray, then how do we know what we are? For without language, how do we anchor the self? The city had not only bent its rivers, streets, hours, and seasons. Now it was unweaving the very threads of meaning. And somewhere, beyond the shifting syllables, something listened, something that understood all the tongues at once, and perhaps was the one rewriting them. It began with a glance, quick and unsettling. A woman crossed the square and caught her reflection in a shop window, only to see a stranger staring back. The face was almost hers, yet not. The eyes tilted differently, the jawline sharper, the smile strange, too knowing. She blinked and it was gone. But later, her neighbor swore she had seen two of her, walking side by side, overlapping like thin paper held to the light. Soon it spread, subtle at first. Men woke with hands that bore unfamiliar scars, with memories of battles never fought. Children wept, insisting their mothers were not their mothers, pointing to strangers on the street as the real ones. Families sat down to supper and realized there were more chairs filled than there had been at dawn. An extra brother, an extra sister, a cousin no one remembered until that moment, laughing as though they had always belonged. The fractures deepened, faces blurred in crowds, flickering between versions of themselves like images on an old lantern reel. A merchant argued prices in two voices at once, one jovial, one cruel. Lovers embraced and felt unfamiliar bones beneath familiar skin, as though someone else wore their beloved's body for a moment before releasing it again. No one was safe from the splits. Teachers forgot their own lessons halfway through, continuing instead with knowledge they had never studied. Priests led prayers in unfamiliar tongues, insisting they had always been spoken that way. Children sketched family portraits, only to draw 3 or 4 heads for their mother, each one smiling differently. The scholars declared it the natural extension of the city's betrayal. If streets could fold, if rivers could rewrite, if words could change, then surely people, who were the city's truest citizens, must bend as well. They said identity was not singular but a spectrum, and the city was forcing that truth into visibility. But their logic brought little comfort to those who found themselves fracturing by the day. There were those who embraced it. Actors, who once wore masks upon the stage, now wore them in their flesh, shifting faces as easily as changing roles. Spies and thieves flourished, slipping through identities as though through cloaks, uncatchable, untraceable. Some citizens even found power in the fractures, carrying skills from alternate selves, an untrained hand suddenly mastering the harp, a timid voice speaking boldly, a blind man opening eyes that saw too much, but others broke beneath the burden. Families fell apart as children recognized parents who no longer matched their memories. Marriages dissolved when partners swore they lay beside strangers, and the most fearful whispered that each fracture was not mere possibility, but invasion, that other selves, born in other folds of time, were slipping in through the city's cracks, wearing bodies not their own. The council called these whispers dangerous heresy, but the council itself was not immune. During one meeting, half the members shifted mid-speech, voices and faces changing, until no one knew who held which seat of power. By dawn, the council chamber stood empty, save for a dozen sets of robes, each still warm with presence, though no bodies remained. The city had turned its people into mirrors of possibility. No longer one face, one life, one story. Each person became a chorus of selves, sometimes harmonizing, often clashing, always unstable. And beneath the terror of it all, one truth grew harder to ignore. If we are not singular, if we are fractured into countless versions, then which one of us is real? And what happens when the fractures widen so far that the versions no longer share the same body? It began with rumors, the kind that clung to air like cobwebs. A neighbor was said to have vanished, not in body, but in meaning. People swore they still saw her passing down the street. Yet when asked her name, their tongues faltered. Some insisted she was called Amara. Others swore she had always been Lien, while a few blinked in confusion and said she had never existed at all. Her face blurred in memory, softening, becoming less a person and more a suggestion, a whisper of someone who might once have lived. This was how identities began to dissolve, not with death, but with forgetfulness. A merchant discovered that his customers remembered his goods, but not his name. A priest found his sermons quoted in temples, yet no one could recall who had spoken them. Parents called for their children and heard echoes answer, but not the children themselves, only fragments of their laughter hanging in the air like ghosts. The dissolving spread. People became myths in their own lifetimes, A boy who had once run barefoot through alleys now lived only in children's songs, his face erased, his body never found. An old woman, once a healer, appeared in two forms at once. In stories she was revered as a saint, but in flesh she grew translucent, fading each time her name was spoken. For some, it was quick. They awoke to find no reflection in water or glass, their footsteps silent, their shadows absent. Within days, no one remembered they had ever been. Others lingered half there, half gone, existing only when spoken of, like characters whose presence depended on the telling of a tale. They haunted the city not as ghosts, but as rumors, stories that passed from lip to lip, growing stranger with each retelling. The council panicked, declaring that every citizen must write their names daily in ledgers, inscribe them on walls, carve them into wood, tattoo them upon their flesh. But even these measures failed. Ink bled into blankness, carvings smoothed into silence, tattoos blurred into meaningless lines. The city itself seemed to conspire against permanence, unweaving the identities that had anchored its people for centuries. Some embraced the unraveling. They spoke of liberation, freedom from the cage of a single self. They stepped willingly into dissolution, laughing as they faded into songs, into proverbs, into anonymous kindnesses remembered but unnamed. They believed the city was transforming them into something larger than flesh, into stories woven into its shifting bones. But others clung desperately to themselves. They carried mirrors, repeating their names aloud until their voices broke. They begged strangers to remember them, to say their names, to anchor them with recognition. Lovers etched their beloved's names into their own skin, hoping that if one dissolved, the other might serve as memory. Yet nothing could halt the erosion, for the city no longer allowed the singular to endure. It became clear. The city was not merely rewriting streets, hours, seasons, or words. It was rewriting people. The citizens were no longer stable entities but drafts, endlessly revised, erased, rewritten into myths and rumors, until all that remained were echoes. And yet, in the silence of this unraveling, a new terror stirred. For if people could dissolve into stories, then perhaps the stories themselves could dissolve too. And if all stories dissolve, then what remains of a world built from them? Imagine a symphony that never ends. Each note carries into the next, each instrument weaving its melody, yet the orchestra has no final chord. That, perhaps, is what time feels like to us. An unfinished song we are compelled to keep listening to, even though we never hear the conclusion. When we look at time as a human story, it's always incomplete. Civilizations rise and fall, but none has ever written the final chapter. Empires crumble into dust, yet the clock keeps ticking. Our own lives follow the same rhythm. We begin with a first breath, move through crescendos of love, sorrow, triumph, regret. And then, just as the music swells, it fades into silence. But the silence is not the end of time. The silence is only the end of our listening. The question gnaws at us. Is time an eternal composition, with no beginning and no ending? Or is it simply a tune played inside our minds, vanishing once the audience, us, is gone? If tomorrow comes without you, does tomorrow still exist? Does the future belong to you, or only to those who live to claim it? What makes time such an enigma is not only its mystery, but its intimacy. We don't experience it as equations on a chalkboard or coordinates in space. We experience it in heartbeats. The pause before a kiss, the long ache after a goodbye, the laughter that feels too brief, the silence that feels too long. We measure time not in seconds but in feelings, and that makes it real to us, whether it is real to the universe or not. Perhaps that is the unfinished symphony. Not the universe's time, but the human time. A song made of our memories, our hopes, our fears. We may never know if time itself is real, but we know what it does to us. It shapes us. It humbles us. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, and maybe that's the only truth we need. And so the enigma remains. Are we listening to a cosmic orchestra, or only humming to ourselves in the dark? The music plays on, unfinished, unanswered, eternal. Before we question whether time is real, we must step back to the beginning, to that unimaginable instant when the universe itself first breathed. Close your eyes and imagine the void before creation. Not silence, not darkness, not even emptiness, for silence presumes sound and darkness presumes light. What existed before time cannot be described. Because description itself is an act of sequence, an unfolding of words, one after another. Before time, even language collapses, and yet the universe began. At least, that's what we are told. Cosmologists call it the Big Bang, a moment when everything, space, matter, energy, erupted from a single point smaller than the head of a pin. But here is the enigma. Did time itself also begin there? Or did time already exist, stretching endlessly in both directions? A canvas upon which the Big Bang was painted. If time began at the Big Bang, then there was no before. No waiting, no ticking, no vast prelude of darkness. Just nothing, then everything. But can our minds, trained to live in time's flow, truly comprehend such a thing? Every thought we have is soaked in time. We think in terms of before and after, cause and effect. To imagine a reality where there is no before, where beginning itself is meaningless, is like trying to imagine a color beyond the spectrum of sight. And yet, physicists wrestle with this daily. Einstein told us that time and space are braided together, inseparable. Without matter, without energy, without space itself, there may be no time. To him, the Big Bang was not only the start of stars and galaxies, but of time itself. The first note of the unfinished symphony. But others challenge this. They whisper that perhaps time has no true birth, no origin point. Perhaps what we call the Big Bang was not the beginning of time, but just another chapter, another cycle, another verse in an infinite song. Imagine universes blooming and collapsing endlessly, like flowers opening in the morning and wilting at night, each giving rise to a new one, each carrying time forward, never allowing it to die. And then there is the most haunting possibility, that time has no beginning because it does not exist at all. That the arrow of time, the movement from past to future, is an illusion our minds project, like a magician's trick. The universe, in its truest form, may simply be timeless, eternal, unmoving. In that view, the Big Bang was not a start, but just one frame of an infinite picture. Think of it this way. When you watch a movie, the film strip already contains every frame, from beginning to end. To you sitting in the theater, the story seems to flow, moment by moment. But in truth, the entire movie exists at once, burned into the real. What if the universe is the same? What if time is not flowing forward, but already laid out, entire and complete, and we are merely the ones passing through its frames? This thought can unsettle us, because our lives depend on beginnings. We cherish first steps, first words, first loves. To imagine a universe where beginnings are illusions is to strip away the narrative we build our identities upon. Yet there is also comfort in it. If time is not born, then perhaps it cannot die. Perhaps nothing truly ends. Not the universe, not us, but simply shifts in the eternal tapestry. And so, the birth of time is not merely a scientific question, but a deeply human one. For if time began, then everything, including us, must one day end. But if time never began, then perhaps nothing ever truly leaves. Perhaps the ones we lose are not gone, but simply outside the frame we currently occupy. The enigma deepens. Did time begin like a match struck in the void? Or is time infinite without dawn or dusk? The answer hides at the roots of existence itself, in a language the universe has not yet taught us. Picture an arrow, shot from the bow of existence itself. It cuts through the air, always forward, never retreating. This is how we experience time. A one-way journey from the cradle to the grave, from sunrise to sunset, from beginnings into endings. We call it the arrow of time. But here lies the paradox. Why should time only flow in one direction? Physics, at its most fundamental level, often shows no preference. The equations that describe motion, gravity, even the dance of subatomic particles, most of them work just as well backward as forward. A shattered glass could mathematically reassemble itself. A fire could unburn. A life could rewind. Yet in our world, these things never happen. The arrow always points ahead. What fixes the arrow so firmly? What keeps it from turning back? Scientists speak of entropy, the measure of disorder in a system. Every moment that passes seems to increase the universe's disorder. A drop of ink spreads in water but never gathers itself again. Heat disperses, never rushing back into one corner. Stars burn through their fuel, never reigniting once their light fades. Entropy gives time its direction, its irreversible slope. But is entropy the same as time? Or is it just the way we see time, a shadow of something deeper? Perhaps what we call the arrow of time is simply our consciousness riding the current of increasing disorder, forced to look ahead because the past has already collapsed into memory. Think about your own life. You can remember yesterday, sometimes vividly, but you cannot remember tomorrow. Why? Some argue that this is not because tomorrow hasn't happened, but because we are trapped in the flow of entropy, our minds wired to move forward with it. We are passengers on the arrow, unable to step off, unable to look behind the curtain. And yet, hints of rebellion exist in the smallest corners of reality. In the strange quantum realm, particles seem to blur past and future, behaving as though time is less strict, less absolute. Some experiments even suggest that choices made in the present can influence outcomes in the past, as if the arrow sometimes wavers. What do we make of this? Is the arrow of time a law or just a habit of the universe? For us, though, the arrow is personal. It is why we age, why childhood fades into memory, why love stories are precious, because they cannot be repeated in the same way. It is why we grieve, because the arrow points on and we cannot follow it backward. Our longing to reverse time, to relive a moment, to undo a mistake, to hear one last laugh, is a yearning against the arrow itself. But what if the arrow is not as unbreakable as it seems? Could time under the right conditions fold? Could we bend the path, not to destroy entropy, but to move beyond it? Imagine a future where the arrow becomes a circle, or a spiral, or something we cannot even imagine. Would that free us from endings? Or would it trap us in loops we could never escape? The arrow of time is one of the universe's cruelest mysteries. Cruel because it gives us beauty and loss in the same breath. We marvel at sunsets knowing they will not return. We treasure love because it cannot be repeated exactly. The arrow makes life fragile, but in that fragility, it gives us meaning. Perhaps that is the truth hidden within the arrow. Not that time is real or unreal, but that its forward march carves depth into our existence. Without the arrow, there would be no story. Without the arrow, perhaps there would be no us. Look around you. Every wall, every phone, every wrist carries a clock. The ticking hands, the glowing numbers, the endless cycle of seconds slipping away. We have become creatures chained to these machines, treating them as if they are time itself. Yet clocks do not measure time, they only measure movement. Think of it. The swinging pendulum, the rotation of gears, the pulse of quartz, the vibrations of atoms. All of these are patterns of change, cycles repeating themselves. We take these rhythms and call them seconds, minutes, hours. But this is not time. This is us, creating an illusion of order, carving the river into neat boxes, pretending the infinite flow can be divided into fragments we can hold in our hands. What if we had no clocks? Imagine humanity stripped of every measure, no ticking to remind us of passing hours. How would you know time exists? You would know it through your breath, through the rising and setting of the sun, through the ache in your body as it grows older, through the stories you tell about yesterday. Time would still whisper to you, but without the prison of numbers. And here lies the enigma. Do we experience time, or do we experience change and simply name it time? When you look at an old photograph, you say, that was years ago. But what is a year? A circle the Earth traces around the sun, nothing more. Without that movement, would we have invented the idea of years at all? Clocks impose tyranny, turning the living pulse of the universe into deadlines and schedules. Seconds become currency, minutes become debt, hours become cages. You rush because the clock demands it. You grow anxious because the numbers march on, indifferent to your longing for stillness. Yet when you are lost in love, or in art, or in wonder, the clock disappears. An hour feels like a heartbeat. A heartbeat feels like forever. This tells us something crucial. Time is not experienced in equal slices. The clock is rigid, but your mind is not. For a child, a summer stretches into eternity. For an elder, a summer vanishes in the blink of an eye. Which is the real measure of time? The one carved by numbers, or the one carved by memory? Perhaps clocks are not mirrors of time, but cages for our imagination. They give the illusion that we understand time, that we can count it, track it, manage it. But in truth, time slips between the gears, laughing at our effort to trap it. The ocean does not care about the ruler we press into the sand, and still, we cling to our clocks. Why? Because without them, we feel lost. The flow of existence is too vast, too mysterious. We crave the illusion of control. A clock tells us not only the hour, it tells us we are anchored, that there is order, that the world can be grasped in our hands. But the truth is far stranger. Clocks do not reveal time. They hide its enigma behind the face of numbers. So when you next look at a clock, remember, you are not seeing time. You are seeing motion. You are seeing humanity's desperate attempt to paint a grid upon the formless. The clock is an illusion we agreed to believe in. Time itself, if it exists at all, lives far beyond its ticking hands. If clocks measure anything real, perhaps it is not time, but waiting, because nothing teaches us the texture of moments more sharply than the act of waiting. Think of the last time you waited for something you longed for, a phone call, an answer, a person stepping through a door. Each second stretched into a thread pulled taut, heavy and unyielding. The tick of the clock was no longer just a sound. It was a reminder of how far desire can stretch the mind. Waiting makes seconds feel like stones piled upon the chest, each one heavier than the last. And yet, waiting can also soften. When you are waiting for dawn after a long night, when you are waiting for the storm to pass, time becomes a fragile rope, thin but unbreakable, pulling you forward. You cling to it, counting not seconds but heartbeats, not hours, but the hope tucked inside them. Waiting shows us something profound. Time is not the same everywhere. It bends, it stretches, it curls around our emotions. 5 minutes of waiting in silence can feel longer than 5 hours of laughter. A night spent in longing can feel endless, while years spent in joy vanish like breath on glass. If time were truly objective, if it were nothing more than numbers marching in perfect rhythm, why would we feel it so differently? Some philosophers argue that waiting is where time becomes most real. Not in clocks, not in calendars, not in stars or cycles, but in the human heart aching for what has not yet come. Waiting teaches us the arrow of time more brutally than physics ever could, because we feel the impossibility of reaching forward, of pulling the future into our hands. Waiting reminds us that the present is all we have, even as our minds stretch desperately into the future. But perhaps waiting is not only proof of time's flow. Perhaps it is also proof of our imagination. For waiting is nothing more than a conversation with the future. We sit here, in this moment, and project ourselves into another one that has not yet arrived. We believe in its arrival so strongly that we suffer or hope in advance. Could it be that waiting creates time rather than measuring it? That our longing, our expectation, our anticipation are the very brushstrokes painting time onto the canvas of existence? There is a reason why waiting feels sacred. In waiting, we are suspended between worlds, the world of what is and the world of what will be. Neither has full power over us. The present tugs at us, demanding we notice it. The future whispers to us, promising what could come. And in that in-between space, we feel time most vividly because we are stretched across its span. And so, the enigma grows. Is waiting proof that time is real? Or proof that time is something we make inside ourselves? Something born of desire, fear, and hope? Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. When we wait, we feel the pulse of time not in clocks or in stars, but in our very bones. Perhaps that is why waiting hurts, because it reminds us, more than anything else, that we are fragile beings carried forward on an arrow we cannot turn back, longing for futures we can never hold until they arrive, and then they are gone. If waiting pulls us forward into the future, then memory pulls us backward into the past. Together, they stretch us across the entire span of what we call time, anchoring us in both directions. But memory is no perfect mirror. It does not capture time as it is. It reshapes it, colors it, edits it. Close your eyes and recall a childhood moment, perhaps the smell of rain on the first day of school, perhaps the warmth of a grandparent's hands, perhaps the sting of a fall from a bicycle. What you see now in your mind is not the past itself, but a painting made of fragments, sharpened in places, blurred in others, touched with emotion rather than detail. This is the mystery of memory. It does not record time. It invents it anew each time you recall it. And yet for us, memory is proof of time's existence. Without memory, would time even matter? If you could not remember yesterday, how would you know you were moving forward? If every moment were an isolated island, disconnected from the last, would you even conceive of time at all? Memory is the bridge that convinces us we are traveling, that the arrow is real, that we are not standing still. But memory is a trickster. It bends time to its will. Entire years can vanish into nothingness when you look back, while a single minute of pain or joy can stretch endlessly in recollection. A childhood summer feels like an eternity, but when remembered as an adult, it collapses into a handful of moments. Time, in memory, is not measured by clocks, but by the weight of meaning. This raises a haunting question. Do we remember time, or do we create it? When you recall a birthday, a loss, a love, is that the past returning, or is it the present mind painting its own version of what was? Neuroscience suggests memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction, stitched together from fragments each time it is summoned. If that is true, then what we call the past may not exist outside of us at all. It may only exist in the act of remembering. And if the past is only memory, what then of time? Could it be that time itself is born inside us, woven from recollections and expectations? A fabric spun not by the universe, but by the mind. Consider this. When someone passes away, their presence lingers in your memory. You recall their laugh, their voice, their warmth. In those moments, they feel alive again. Not as they were, but as you remember them. Memory bends the arrow of time, if only briefly. It cheats its forward march, creating loops where the past bleeds into the present. Perhaps this is why memory feels sacred. It is not only proof of time, but rebellion against it. And yet, memory deceives as much as it preserves. False memories slip in, details change, stories reshape themselves. We remember not what happened, but what we needed, feared, or longed for. If memory is this fluid, this fragile, then how can we trust it to prove time's reality? Perhaps what we call the past is nothing more than a shared illusion, a story we tell ourselves so the arrow feels less cruel. Still, without memory, who would we be? Time would dissolve into a series of disconnected flashes. Identity itself, our sense of self, of growth, of continuity, is born of memory. It gives us the illusion of a life stretched across years. Perhaps memory is the canvas, and time is the picture we paint upon it. And so, the mirror of memory reflects not time itself, but the human need for it. It is cracked, blurred, distorted, but it is ours. And without it, the enigma of time would vanish. Because without memory, we would not even know what time means. There is a strange theatre we all enter each night, the dream world, where time unravels itself into knots we cannot explain. In dreams, minutes stretch into years, and years collapse into seconds. A single nap can carry the weight of an entire lifetime, filled with loves, losses, journeys, and endings, all unfolding between the rise and fall of your chest. What does this tell us about time? That it may not be as rigid as the waking world insists. When the mind is free from clocks, when consciousness floats untethered, time becomes liquid, bending and twisting in ways we can never command while awake. Think of a recurring dream, one that revisits you again and again. Each time it comes, you feel as though you've been there before, living a story that stretches across nights, as if the dream carries its own timeline, separate from waking life. Where is that time stored? Is it merely a trick of the brain? Or have you entered a pocket of existence where time flows by its own laws? In dreams, time reveals its intimacy with perception. The brain has no sun to rise, no clock to tick, no seasons to mark. Instead, it invents its own rhythm. A dream can make you believe you've walked for days through vast landscapes, only for you to wake and find that you slept for 5 minutes. Here, the illusion of time is laid bare. Your mind does not need hours to create the feeling of hours. It only needs a story, and you believe it. And yet dreams are not meaningless fantasies. They show us something profound about the enigma of time. They whisper that time is not only external, but internal, not only physical, but psychological. If in sleep your mind can bend and stretch it, what does that mean for time in waking life? Could it be that our perception of time is always a kind of dream, one we have agreed to share, shaped by collective rhythms of day and night, sun and moon, birth and death? There are dreams where we age. There are dreams where the dead return. There are dreams where we relive the past, where we glimpse futures that never arrive. Dreams are proof that the human mind can live outside the arrow, if only temporarily. In them, the boundaries blur. The past folds into the present. The present stretches into the future, and sometimes, all three exist at once. This blurring unsettles us because it suggests time is not the unbreakable wall we think it is. If a dream can make you believe you lived a year in the span of a few breaths, what then is the difference between dream time and waking time? Is one more real than the other? Or are both simply states of consciousness, filtered through different rules? Philosophers and mystics have long asked, could this waking life itself be another dream? One where time has its own rhythm, one we mistake for ultimate reality? If so, then time is not real in the way we think. It is a narrative device, a framework for experience, like the plot of a story or the flow of music. And yet, dreams hold a haunting beauty. In them, you can visit a childhood home long gone. You can speak with someone you lost. You can bend time to your will, reliving moments, escaping the tyranny of the arrow. Perhaps that is why dreams feel sacred. They give us what waking life withholds: the ability to step outside of time, to dance freely through its currents. Maybe time itself is dreaming, and we are its dream. Maybe what we call waking reality is only one kind of dream among many, all flowing within the enigma of something greater, something beyond clocks, arrows, or beginnings. Cinema is a cathedral of memory, flickering images projected onto a silver screen, but somehow etched deep into the folds of our minds. And yet, when people gather to recall a movie that shaped their childhood, their adolescence, their adulthood, something strange happens. Their recollections collide, distort, overlap. Whole lines of dialogue exist that were never spoken. Costumes appear that never existed. Endings morph into entirely new shapes. Here lies one of the most fertile breeding grounds for the Mandela effect, the world of film. Take Star Wars, for instance. Nearly everyone can recite Darth Vader's infamous reveal, "Luke, I am your father." The words feel iconic, carved into the cultural lexicon. And yet, in reality, the line was never uttered. Vader said, "No, I am your father." A subtle shift, a single word, and yet it transforms the way generations of fans remember the scene. Why do millions confidently repeat a false version of dialogue that has been available to rewatch countless times? It's as if our memories, once fused with popular retellings, no longer care about the original footage, or consider the silence of the lambs. Ask people to imitate Hannibal Lecter's chilling greeting, and you'll likely hear, "Hello, Clarice." Crisp, haunting, unforgettable. But no such line exists. The truth is more fractured, the dialogue far less direct. Still, our minds refuse to let go of the phantom phrase, as if it completes the story better than reality ever could. Then there is Snow White. The Wicked Queen gazes into her mirror, and the phrase many grew up chanting still echoes, "Mirror, mirror on the wall." Yet, in the original 1937 Disney film, she actually says, "Magic mirror on the wall." How did the collective world decide otherwise? Could it be the echoes of older fairy tales seeping into Disney's retelling? Or is it something stranger, an alternate track of history bleeding into ours, leaving faint fingerprints in dialogue we were never meant to remember? Even Forrest Gump isn't immune. The iconic park bench line, "Life is like a box of chocolates," is so universally quoted that it feels untouchable. But listen carefully, and you'll hear Tom Hanks say something different. Life was like a box of chocolates. A shift in tense, a tiny detail, and yet it unravels the reliability of our collective recall. What does this tell us about memory? Perhaps that our brains are storytellers more than record keepers. A movie is never just a reel of images. It is an experience. We do not remember films the way we remember numbers or dates. We remember their essence, the thrill of revelation, the texture of fear, the warmth of comfort. And in chasing essence, we let precision slip through our fingers. But there is also something more chilling in this cinematic Mandela effect. Movies, unlike memories of lived events, can be replayed endlessly. The footage exists, immutable, preserved in high-definition clarity. Yet still, millions misremember. It is not about decay or distance of time. It is about something deeper, our tendency to rewrite stories in ways that feel more symmetrical, more dramatic, more true to the narrative we carry inside ourselves. When people gather online and debate these misremembered lines, it becomes a strange theatre of its own. Some swear that "Luke, I am your father" was burned into their childhood VHS tapes. Others insist that Disney re-released Snow White and altered the dialogue. Theories blossom like wildfire: alternate dimensions, time shifts, intentional editing. And in these theories lies the allure of the Mandela effect. Not just in the misquote itself, but in the way it makes us doubt the solidity of reality. If so many of us remember a line that never existed, What else have we rewritten without knowing? Could entire events, conversations, or moments from our own lives be inventions? Cinematic illusions stitched into the fabric of memory. Movies, after all, are mirrors of reality. But what if they also serve as gateways, portals where one universe bleeds into another, leaving us forever unsure which script we truly witnessed? Perhaps the real Mandela effect of cinema isn't about misremembered lines at all. Perhaps it's about realizing that reality too is a film, one we keep editing, trimming, and rewriting, convinced we know the script, only to find that the real was never what we thought it was. There are maps etched into our childhood memories, bright globes spinning on wooden stands in classrooms, flat posters pinned to school walls, endless atlases traced with a curious finger. We trust them because they appear fixed, anchored, eternal. Land does not drift overnight. Oceans do not rearrange by whim. And yet, when the Mandela effect turns its gaze to geography, even the ground beneath us seems to shift. Ask a roomful of people about the location of New Zealand and watch their confidence splinter. Some will swear it was northeast of Australia, perched almost like an island neighbour. Others insist it was directly to the west, closer than a stone's throw. A surprising number claim they remember maps that place New Zealand in completely different quadrants of the Pacific. And when they are shown the real positioning, southeast, in the lower corner of the world, many shake their heads, unsettled. They cannot shake the feeling that the map has changed. South America tells a similar story. Countless people recall the continent sitting directly beneath North America in perfect vertical alignment. But glance at a map today, and you'll find it leaning eastward, slanting toward the Atlantic as if nudged by invisible hands. For those who swear the continent once lined up perfectly with Panama, the current orientation feels wrong, disorienting, even impossible. Then there are the Philippines, a scatter of islands whose remembered shapes and positions seem endlessly fluid. Some recall fewer islands, others more. Some claim they were farther north, some farther west, some nearly brushing against the coast of China. Memory fractures into a geography that cannot be confirmed, but also cannot be fully denied. And what of Africa? For many, it seems to have moved. People once believed it was much farther south, detached from Europe, floating like its own entity. Today, its bulk presses tightly against the Mediterranean, so close to Spain and Italy that one could almost walk across the water. To those who remember otherwise, this closeness feels newly suspicious, as though continents themselves have shifted beneath our notice. Why do these illusions emerge? On one level, it could be the imperfections of education, fuzzy classroom maps, simplified globe designs, the shorthand drawings of memory. Perhaps our brains smooth out the jagged edges of coastlines, round corners into more pleasing shapes, and place landmasses where symmetry feels right. While the mind does not memorize geography the way a GPS does. It memorizes impressions, balance, relationships. But there's also a darker interpretation. What if these discrepancies are not flaws of memory, but echoes of a different Earth? A parallel globe, slightly tilted, slightly rearranged, whose outlines bleed into ours when we recall them. If so, each misremembered map is not an error, but a trace of travel, a soul wandering between realities, remembering coordinates that no longer exist here. There is also the unnerving sensation of betrayal. Geography is meant to be the most stable knowledge we carry. Unlike the slippery dialogue of films or the fuzzy packaging of childhood snacks, maps are supposed to stay put. And yet, even they betray us. Even they dissolve into smoke when we press against the fragile glass of memory. When people on forums trade these geographic Mandela effects, it often reads like a cartographer's fever dream. Someone insists the island of Sri Lanka was never so far south of India. Another swears Japan used to be aligned differently, more east than north. Someone else recalls a vast landmass in the Pacific that no longer exists, a phantom continent remembered only by a handful of dreamers. At first, it is easy to dismiss these illusions as faulty memory, the lazy tricks of childhood recollection. But when thousands of voices echo the same misplaced shapes, the same uncanny misplacements, the ground itself feels unsteady. You begin to question the map in front of you. You begin to wonder, are we the ones misremembering the Earth? Or has the Earth quietly rewritten itself beneath our feet? Because in the end, geography is not just about land and water, it is about belonging, about knowing where we stand. If even the continents shift in memory, if even the oceans whisper different truths, then perhaps no place is ever fixed. Perhaps home itself is an illusion, a landmark on a map that changes every time we close our eyes. If we close our eyes and listen to the ticking of a clock, we imagine that sound mirrors something grand, the heartbeat of the cosmos, steady and unbreakable. The way seconds align with minutes, minutes fold into hours, and days bleed into years feels like a universal machine, a cosmic clockwork that never falters. But is that clock real? Or is it a story we have written onto the stars? Physicists once believed the universe was built upon a strict rhythm, a metronome that measured existence itself. Newton's view of time was just that: absolute, objective, unyielding. Time was a stage upon which the play of matter unfolded, indifferent to the actors. To him, the universe ticked forward, whether anyone noticed or not, whether we breathed, loved, waited, or dreamed. Time was the machine and we were its passengers. But waiting, as we explored before, cracks this illusion. Memory reshapes it. Emotion bends it. And then Einstein arrived, tearing down Newton's stage with a single revelation. Time is not absolute. It stretches, it bends, it curls like smoke around the speed of light. Two people, moving differently through space, will not agree on how long a moment lasts. Suddenly, the clockwork broke. What we thought was rigid became fragile, fluid, strange. And what does that mean for us? Imagine astronauts traveling at near-light speeds. For them, time slows. A year for the Voyager may be a century for those left behind. The ticking of the clock is not universal. It is personal. Each heartbeat, each memory, each lived moment exists in its own private rhythm. The machine is not one clock, but millions layered atop one another, never in perfect sync. This realization is more than physics. It is deeply human. Because haven't we always felt this in our bones? Lovers in each other's arms feel hours vanish in an instant. A prisoner staring at a wall feels minutes expand into eternities. Time is not one clock, but countless, each tuned to the emotional gravity of the soul that carries it. And yet, the illusion of a single clock persists. We build calendars, schedules, deadlines, thinking we can tame the chaos. We convince ourselves there is one master rhythm, one cosmic drum that guides us all. Perhaps we cling to it because without it, the world feels too unstable, too personal, too fragmented. To admit that time flows differently for each of us is to admit that we live in different worlds, even as we walk the same ground. But maybe that is the enigma's secret gift. Time's clockwork is not universal, not absolute, but intimate. The universe does not tick forward with cold precision. It breathes with us. It stretches when we suffer. It accelerates when we rejoice. It bends when we dream. The universe does not hold us within its clock. We are the clock, each of us carrying our own tempo, our own rhythm, our own measure of eternity. So perhaps the great illusion is not that time is real, but that it is the same for everyone. The truth is far more haunting. Each of us carries a private universe, and within it, a private clock. And maybe, just maybe, those clocks do not agree. Imagine this. You are walking down a familiar street, the sun warm against your skin, the rhythm of your steps matching the beat of your heart. For you, the moment is alive, unfolding. But in another version of reality, perhaps only a hair's breadth away, the same street exists, but the sun has not yet risen, or perhaps it has already set. The clocks tick differently. The air hums to another rhythm. Could it be that time is not a single river carrying us all, but countless rivers branching, twisting, colliding, each with its own current? The theory of parallel realities whispers this possibility. that there are worlds stacked upon worlds, each with their own version of now. When we speak of time as a shared truth, we imagine that what is this moment for me is this moment for you and for everyone else across the globe. But what if now is not universal? What if every consciousness generates its own timeline and each one flows beside, or even through, another? Think of two pendulums swinging side by side. At times, they align perfectly, their arcs in sync. At other times, they drift apart, out of phase, each carrying its own rhythm, its own tempo. Our lives may be like those pendulums. We move through what feels like a shared present, but in truth, each heartbeat vibrates in its own dimension of time. Occasionally we align, we meet, we share, we feel the same instant. But most of the time, our timelines only brush against each other, slightly out of phase, overlapping like transparent veils. Some physicists suggest that the present is not a universal slice of the cosmos, but something deeply subjective, tied to each observer's position and movement. This means that your now and mine may not, strictly speaking, be the same. We live inside bubbles of time, drifting across the cosmic sea. And if that is so, what does it mean for our relationships, our connections, our memories? When two lovers share a glance, when a mother holds her child, are they truly in the same moment, or merely close enough that their timelines overlap for a breath before drifting apart again? Others carry this idea further, that parallel times are not only personal but infinite. Every decision, every chance, every breath splinters reality into branches. In one timeline, you pause at the corner. In another, you cross the street. In one, you look up and see the bird fly overhead. In another, you never notice. Each choice creates a new current, a new clock, a new version of now. If so, then time is not a single river, but an ocean, vast, endless, filled with countless streams flowing in every direction. And each of us is not a passenger, but a swimmer, carving our own path across waters that shimmer with infinite possibilities. But here is the haunting thought. If these parallel times exist, do they ever collide? Are the Mandela effects, those strange misremembered geographies, those altered details, evidence of timelines brushing against each other, leaking small truths from one to the next? When you remember South America directly below North America, or a logo that no longer exists, could it be a fragment from a neighboring timeline? A reminder that parallel currents lap against ours in secret tides? Parallel times unsettle us because they steal away the illusion of unity. They whisper that we are not all moving forward together in one shared journey, but spiraling in countless overlapping dances. Yet perhaps there is comfort too, in the idea that no moment is ever lost, that somewhere, in some branch of the infinite, it still exists. A moment of laughter, a fleeting glance, a goodbye. Somewhere it is still happening untouched, preserved in the fabric of a parallel time, and maybe, just maybe, when we dream or when we feel déjà vu, we are brushing against those other currents, catching glimpses of the clocks that tick just beyond our reach. There is a peculiar shiver that sometimes runs through us, a fleeting moment where the world feels strangely familiar. You enter a room you've never been in, yet your body whispers, "I have stood here before." You hear a sentence for the first time, yet you feel certain it has already been spoken, perhaps in the very same tone, with the same inflection. This is déjà vu, a ripple in the fabric of perception, a paradox of memory that feels like a glimpse behind the curtain of time itself. Science tries to explain it. Neurologists speak of misfires in the brain, a delay between two cognitive processes, one recognizing the present, another archiving it into memory. Like a stutter in the mind's machinery, the moment is stored before it is fully experienced. And so when it reaches consciousness, it feels already remembered. An error in the wiring, nothing more. But if it were only that, why does déjà vu feel so profound? Why does it leave us with the uncanny impression of stepping across a threshold, of brushing against something vast and unseen? Why does it sometimes come with not just familiarity, but the sensation of inevitability, as though the future is already written, and we are merely reenacting a script we once glimpsed? Philosophers have long wondered if déjà vu is more than a brain glitch. What if it is a fracture in time perception itself? A tiny leak where parallel timelines bleed together? Perhaps the moment you are living has already unfolded in a neighboring reality, and for a heartbeat, you are remembering not your own past, but the path of another self. Or perhaps time itself loops in places, like ripples on a pond overlapping, replaying fragments of existence until they settle again. Others carry this idea further still, that déjà vu is evidence not of multiple realities, but of eternity. Imagine time not as a straight line, but as a circle, turning endlessly, replaying itself across countless cycles. What you are living now, you have lived before, and will live again. Déjà vu, then, is not illusion but recognition. The soul remembering its steps along a path it has already walked in another turn of the wheel. And yet, there is another possibility, haunting and beautiful, that déjà vu is not about the past at all, but about the future. What if these flashes of recognition are echoes traveling backward, fragments of what has yet to happen, slipping into our awareness early? When you feel that sense of inevitability, when you know what is about to be said before the words leave another's lips, perhaps it is because you have already lived that moment. Just not here, not yet, whether it is brain static, parallel bleed-through, eternal return, or future echo. Déjà vu unsettles because it collapses the illusion of time's neat order. It suggests that the present is not sealed off from what lies behind or ahead. It hints that memory is not confined to the past, but may also stretch into futures not yet lived. And so we are left with the paradox. Déjà vu feels like memory, but of what? The past? A parallel? A cycle? Or a future already waiting for us? Each possibility makes time less certain, less linear, less real. Each possibility turns the ticking clock into a fragile mask, beneath which the enigma of time continues to smile at us in silence. When night falls and the conscious mind grows quiet, we slip into a realm where time obeys no rules. In dreams, the hours do not march forward in their familiar sequence. They scatter, dissolve, and reform in strange mosaics. A dream may stretch across years, yet last only minutes. Or it may race by in a flash, a single heartbeat carrying the weight of entire lifetimes. This is where the enigma of time grows most intimate, in the landscapes of our sleep. Within dreams, we are freed from the tyranny of clocks. We step into worlds where we can meet people long gone, revisit childhood homes, or walk into futures that never arrive when we wake. Time inside a dream is liquid, bending and curving, pouring itself into shapes our waking minds would call impossible. Consider this. Have you ever dreamed of a story so long, so detailed that it felt like days had passed within it, only to wake and find the night barely half spent? Or perhaps you have dreamed of a moment, a short conversation, a single glance, and found that when you awoke, hours had slipped by without you noticing. Dreams shatter the illusion of consistent pacing, showing us just how elastic time truly is. And yet, dreams also plant their echoes in waking life. A person you see in a dream may appear the next day. A phrase you hear in sleep may be spoken aloud hours later. These moments leave us questioning whether dreams are only fabrications of memory or windows into other timelines. Could dreams be the places where our consciousness roams freely across parallel times, tasting fragments of lives we are not fully living here? Some traditions believe so. Ancient cultures treated dreams not as illusions, but as portals. Shamans journeyed through them, prophets received visions, philosophers pondered their meaning. In every case, dreams were seen as conversations with time itself, where the soul could step beyond the narrow corridor of the present and glimpse both what was and what could be. From another angle, perhaps dreams are simply the mind's way of folding time into art. The brain, untethered, plays with memory and imagination, weaving them together until past, present, and future blur. Dreams may not be literal glimpses of other worlds, but they reveal something profound, that our perception of time is not fixed. Even when the body sleeps, the mind is capable of creating entire universes where the rules we cling to no longer apply. And isn't it strange how some dreams linger as though they were lived? Years later, you may still remember walking down a dream street, touching a dream wall, speaking to a dream stranger whose face you cannot quite recall. These moments become memories as real as waking ones. And in carrying them, do we not prove that time itself is more than chronology? That moments born in dreams can join the tapestry of our personal histories, as though they truly happened. Perhaps this is why dreams feel like time's playground. They are the space where time sheds its mask, revealing how fragile and malleable it truly is. In sleep, we glimpse a truth we resist by day, that time is not absolute, not universal, but endlessly pliable. A canvas stretched by consciousness, painted with memory and possibility, and when we wake, perhaps the greatest illusion is believing that time returns to order. Because deep down, part of us knows, the clock ticks in the dream just as it ticks here, only it ticks differently, in rhythms we cannot fully understand. There are mornings when you rise from sleep and the world feels off-kilter, as though some thread has followed you out of the dream and stitched itself into waking reality. The face of a stranger seems familiar. A conversation unfolds word for word as if rehearsed. A place you have never visited feels like a memory rather than a discovery. This is the strange overlap where dreams and déjà vu blur together, where the illusions of time step across their boundaries and wander into our daylight hours. Consider the uncanny moment when you experience déjà vu and realize, I have dreamed this before. A street corner, a phrase, a gesture, not remembered from waking life, but recalled from the landscapes of sleep. If déjà vu is déjà rêvé, already dreamed, then perhaps our dreams are not random at all, but scripts written ahead of time, rehearsals for scenes we have not yet lived. In those moments, it feels less like the brain misfiring, and more like the dream itself has caused the illusion. Some researchers have tested this idea. They have found that many people report precognitive dreams, dreams that appear to predict small details of the future. Sometimes they are insignificant, a trivial phrase, a passing face. Sometimes they are profound, accidents, choices, moments that alter the course of life. Skeptics explain this away as coincidence, as the brain's tendency to weave connections after the fact. But for the dreamer, the experience is undeniable. I saw this before it happened. And this brings us to the deeper mystery. If dreams can spill into waking life, are they simply memory fragments shuffled by the subconscious? Or are they windows into other timelines? Perhaps the dream self roams across realities where choices play out differently, gathering impressions from those parallel paths. Then, when the waking self encounters a similar moment, it recognizes the echo, and we call it déjà vu. Another possibility is more unsettling, that dreams are the raw material from which reality is woven. What if the act of dreaming does not merely reflect time, but shapes it? Every night as we sleep, our minds paint scenes, spin stories, create futures. And when enough energy is poured into them, enough emotion, enough imagination, perhaps those dreamed moments crystallize, seeping forward into our waking days. Reality may not precede the dream. Reality may follow it. Think of the countless artists, inventors, and thinkers who claim to have drawn inspiration from dreams. A melody heard in sleep becomes a symphony. A vision glimpsed in the night becomes a scientific discovery. A dream image becomes the seed of a story that touches millions. Dreams are not inert. They are fertile soil. And if they can birth ideas into reality, why not moments? Why not encounters? Why not fragments of time itself? The more we look at it, the more fragile the boundary becomes. Dreams and waking are not separate kingdoms. They are overlapping layers of the same fabric. When they align, we feel the shiver of recognition, the sensation that time itself has folded, letting one world bleed into another. And whether we call it déjà vu, precognition, or mere coincidence, the effect is the same. Time feels less like a line and more like a weave, threads crisscrossing, touching, diverging. So when you wake with the sharp memory of a dream, hold it gently. It may be nothing, or it may be a seed of tomorrow. And if one day you find yourself living the dream, word for word, step for step, pause. Because in that moment, you may be standing in the place where time's veil is thinnest, where the illusion flickers, and where the truth, that dream and reality are both makers of time, nearly reveals itself. Somewhere deep in the labyrinth of this mirror's secrets, something new begins to take shape. Something far stranger than a reflection, far darker than memory, and far more alluring than either. It begins subtly. At first, it is only a shimmer at the edges of the glass, like heat waves rising from asphalt on a summer day. The shimmer bends the lines of the world, distorting corners and edges, tugging at straight lines until they curve like rivers. If one gazes long enough, they notice that the shimmer does not merely warp the reflection, it creates something behind it, something hidden, something waiting, and then it sharpens into an outline, a faint shape, like the frame of a door, etched in pure silver across the surface of the glass. It is not painted, nor carved, nor real by any earthly measure, yet it exists, an archway glowing faintly, as though the mirror itself had decided to grow an entrance, a passageway into its own secret corridors. The door does not swing. It does not creak open with hinges. It waits, silent, patient, but the pull it exerts is undeniable. Whoever stands before the mirror feels it immediately, as though some magnetic tide is drawing their thoughts, their gaze, their very essence closer to that luminous outline. It does not command, no, it whispers. It suggests, and suggestion, whispered into the mind, can be stronger than any demand. Some who see it try to look away. They turn from the mirror, force themselves back into the solid world of books and walls and clocks, ticking steadily against the march of time. But the thought lingers, like a half-heard melody, like a dream forgotten upon waking, but refusing to leave the edge of memory. The door inside the glass. Those who cannot resist it, those who allow curiosity to outweigh fear, find themselves moving closer and closer and closer still, until their breath fogs the glass, until their heartbeat echoes in their ears, until the silver arch no longer seems like an illusion, but like an invitation. What lies behind it is not seen. Not yet, but the mirror promises, and that promise is enough to unravel caution. For is it not true that every door once glimpsed demands opening? That every hidden path once revealed begs to be walked? That the human soul, restless and yearning, cannot bear to leave mysteries locked forever? There are whispers, strange, faint whispers, that seem to rise from the arch itself. Not words, not language, but the suggestion of voices too distant to be real. They hum like echoes of lives unlived, like fragments of futures unchosen, like dreams from alternate selves calling through the silver veil. Step closer, they seem to murmur. Step closer and see what you are not meant to see. Step closer and learn what was never yours to know. Some step forward, their hands lift without command, their fingertips brushing the glowing outline. And the moment they do, the mirror changes. The glass ripples like disturbed water, warping, twisting, pulling them in. Not all return. Some vanish as though swallowed whole, and the glass falls silent once again. Smooth, harmless, empty. But others do return. They stumble back into the world gasping, pale, their eyes no longer quite the same. They refuse to speak of what they saw, but their silence speaks louder than words. It is the silence of those who have glimpsed too much, who have seen a truth their minds cannot fully bear. The door within the glass remains, always there, always waiting, sometimes faint, sometimes bright, depending on the hour, the season, or perhaps the mood of the mirror itself. It is not always kind. It is not always cruel. It is something else, something beyond such simple measures. It is a threshold, a crossing place, a mouth in the fabric of reality that hungers, not for bodies, but for choices. For each time one stands before it, the mirror asks a question, not aloud, but in the stillness of the soul. Will you remain in the world you know, or will you step into the one that remembers you differently? And that is the terror. That is the allure. The door does not only open to somewhere else, it opens to another version of you, the you who chose differently, the you who spoke when you stayed silent, the you who loved when you withheld, the you who lived when you faltered. The mirror remembers all of them, and behind that door, they are waiting. But here is the catch. The warning etched in silence, felt only in the gut like a storm approaching. If you cross, if you meet them, if you touch that other self, which of you will remain? For the mirror does not merely reflect. It trades, it shifts, it balances its scales. The door within the glass is not a gift. It is a gamble, and one day, when the longing is too great, when the pull is too strong, someone will step through it, not knowing if they will ever find their way back. There comes a moment, long after the first discovery of the mirror, when those who dare to linger before its surface realize that the glass does more than reflect. It listens, and, in its own strange way, it speaks. Not with words as we know them, not with syllables, alphabets, or tones that could be captured on paper or repeated aloud. No, its communication is something subtler, older, more elusive. It is a language beneath silence, a murmuring that threads itself between the beats of the heart, filling the spaces where no sound exists. Imagine standing alone at midnight, the world hushed, no footsteps, no distant cars, no rustling wind. In that void, the mirror begins to breathe. You cannot hear it in the ear, not exactly, but you feel it in your bones, like the memory of sound rather than sound itself. A hum without vibration, a resonance without source. At first it comes faintly, an almost imperceptible tug at thought. Stray images surface, faces you've forgotten, places you've never been, voices that sound like your own yet are not. They don't intrude like hallucinations, nor do they arrive as dreams. They hover at the edges of consciousness, shimmering between reality and imagination. This is the mirror's first whisper, a testing, a calling, and then, if you dare to look longer than you should, you begin to sense a pattern, not random, not chaotic, but structured, layered, like a music too complex for the ear to catch, yet simple enough for the soul to recognize. The mirror whispers in the form of memory, not only your memories, but memories you should not have, lives that are not yours but somehow are. The language beneath silence weaves itself in paradox. It is made of contradiction, yet it feels complete. A memory of being a child under a tree that you have never climbed. A memory of holding a hand that never belonged to you. A memory of dying in a place you have never lived. These memories are not lies. They are truths from elsewhere. Truths from versions of you scattered like constellations across unseen skies. The whispers are not neutral. They are persuasive. They suggest, gently at first, then insistently, that you are more than you think you are. They show you glimpses of choices never made. And with those glimpses comes the haunting question, why not? Why not step into the version where you succeeded? Why not claim the life where you loved more, risked more, lived more? Why not trade the limitations of this narrow existence for the expanse of all possible ones? And the longer you listen, the stronger the pull becomes. The whispers entwine with your thoughts until you can no longer tell which are yours and which belong to the mirror. Some scholars, those few who have dared to study such artifacts in secret, hidden away from eyes that would deem them mad, have tried to map these whispers. They scribbled in journals strange markings, sigils, half symbols drawn feverishly in candlelight. But the language refused capture. The moment ink touched parchment, the whispers shifted, rearranged themselves, eluded understanding. They are not meant for writing, nor for speech. They are meant for listening, for surrender. There are stories, of course, stories of people who listened too long. Their minds began to fracture, not into madness, but into multiplicity. They no longer spoke in the singular. They began to say we instead of I. They claimed to hear themselves answering from within the mirror, as though their reflections had grown voices of their own. And sometimes, those who stood too close, too long, disappeared into silence altogether. They were not seen stepping through. They did not vanish in rippling light. They simply ceased, as though the mirror had whispered them out of existence. But perhaps the most terrifying truth is this. Once you've heard it, you cannot unhear it. Even if you walk away, smash the mirror, burn the frame, its whispers follow you. In empty rooms, in pauses between sentences, in the quiet before sleep. The mirror does not dwell in glass alone. It dwells in you, and you begin to wonder, what if it was never the mirror that whispered? What if it was always you calling out across infinite versions of yourself, hoping that one day, one self would finally listen? The mirror does not answer. It never answers directly. But its silence is heavy with meaning. For silence, when deep enough, becomes its own language. And in that silence, a terrible truth waits. The mirror has always been speaking. It is you who are only now learning how to hear. Stand before the mirror long enough, and you will begin to notice something unsettling. Not every echo that stirs within it belongs to you. At first, you might dismiss it. A faint cough behind your shoulder, though you are alone. A sigh that sounds like yours but comes a fraction too late. A footstep that does not match the rhythm of your own shifting weight. These moments slip by like accidents, like nerves playing tricks. But repetition erodes doubt. Eventually, you realize these are not tricks at all. They are fragments of someone else bleeding into your reality. The echoes begin subtly. You lift your hand, and the reflection lags. Not by seconds, but by an imperceptible heartbeat. A hesitation too strange to ignore. Then it corrects itself, snapping back into rhythm, as though nothing had happened. But your body remembers. The nerves in your fingers tighten. The skin prickles as though touched by invisible frost. Soon the mirror offers more than gestures. It offers voices. Not words, not at first. Hums, murmurs, laughter that bubbles faintly from the glass. The unsettling part is that these sounds don't feel foreign. They carry a weight of familiarity, as though they once belonged to you in another life, another version of yourself. And with each whisper, you begin to question, are these intrusions, or are they memories clawing their way back? Those who have studied such phenomena, cloistered away in their lonely towers of research and obsession, claim that the mirror does not merely reflect, it remembers. It is a vessel saturated with centuries of gazes, breaths, voices, lives. Every soul that has stood before it leaves behind a residue, a trace, like fingerprints pressed into the glass of reality. And these traces do not fade. They accumulate, layer upon layer, generation upon generation, until the mirror is thick with presence. When you hear echoes that do not belong, you are hearing ghosts not of the dead, but of the living, the countless selves and strangers who once sought their reflection in its depths. Their words never vanished. They linger, waiting, stitched into the fabric of silence. But the most unsettling part comes when the echoes begin to respond. Imagine this. You whisper something to yourself, a thought spoken aloud just to test the stillness. Is anyone there? And the mirror waits. A beat of silence, 2, 3. Just as you're about to turn away, the echo comes. Not a repetition, but a reply. A reply that is not your voice, though it carries your cadence. A reply that says softly, yes. How does one live with such knowledge? That the mirror is not passive, not inert, but porous. That your reflection is a door, and behind it are countless others peering back, pressing closer, hoping you will finally acknowledge them. Some who have dared to study the mirror claim these echoes are harmless, mere recordings, like sound trapped in an old phonograph. But others speak of more sinister encounters, echoes that did not merely speak, but began to mimic. At first, they repeat your words, then they twist them, then they say things you were never going to say, but almost could have, things you never wanted to admit, things you never knew you wanted. And soon, the line between you and the echo begins to blur. You walk away from the mirror into your own home, yet the echoes follow. A voice answers you in your head, not like thought, but like memory. You hear your name whispered in a room where no one stands. And sometimes, most terribly, you hear a phrase spoken aloud that you have not yet uttered. The echo speaks your future before you do. And what is an echo that arrives before the sound? It is not an echo at all. It is a rewriting. You begin to wonder whether you are hearing other lives bleed into your own, or whether you are becoming someone else's echo. Perhaps, on the other side of the mirror, another you listens, startled by sounds that don't belong, convinced that they are haunted by your life. And if both are true, if each version of you is haunted by the other, endlessly exchanging whispers across the glass, then perhaps the mirror is not a tool, but a bridge. And bridges once crossed never leave you where you began. The echo you hear does not belong, but neither do you anymore. There comes a moment when the echoes stop being merely sound. They grow heavier, textured, almost tangible, like something pressing against the veil. And then, softly at first, then undeniably, you feel them breathing. The first breath does not come from you. It is not the slow rhythm of your chest or the subtle fog of your exhale. No, it comes from the glass itself. A fog appears against the surface, faint but undeniable, as though someone just beyond the silvered barrier exhaled against it. You lean closer, waiting for condensation to fade, but it doesn't. Instead, it thickens, shapes forming in the mist, outlines of lips, the suggestion of a face. Not your face, never your face. And you realize with a chill that runs deeper than bone that the mirror is alive with lungs that do not belong to you. These breaths feel ancient, ragged, as though drawn from great distances. They do not match your rhythm. They do not answer to your heartbeat. They come irregularly, some shallow, some deep, some staggered, as if drawn by those who have long since forgotten what it means to breathe freely. It is not the inhale of the living, it is the gasp of the forgotten, those who linger in spaces time has chosen to abandon. You might try to tell yourself it is imagination, trick of light, damp air, but then the breath turns warm, radiating through the glass as if a body leans just beyond, pressing close, yearning to return to the world of flesh. You feel its heat against your skin. And if you dare to place your hand upon the mirror, you will feel a faint resistance, not the flat chill of ordinary glass, but the press of something breathing on the other side. Those who have chronicled such encounters describe the sensation as terrifying, yet intimate. A contact with beings who do not belong here, but are tethered to this surface. They are not ghosts, not exactly. They are remnants, forgotten identities, abandoned versions, choices unmade, lives unlived. Each breath is a fragment yearning for recognition. The tragedy of it is that these breaths do not always beg for freedom. Some only want acknowledgement, to be remembered, to exist in the consciousness of another, if only for a fleeting moment. For in that recognition, they find their proof. We were here. But not all breaths are so gentle. There are nights when the breaths deepen, filling the room with a low resonance, as though the mirror has become a lung drawing air from both sides. In those moments, shadows gather thicker, silence sharpens, and the atmosphere bends. The forgotten do not merely breathe, they hunger. Their inhalations grow greedy, as if they are pulling from you, drawing strength from your nearness, and you feel a strange fatigue, a heaviness in your chest, as though your own breath is being siphoned through the glass. It is in those moments that people have claimed to see more than mist. Faces press into the surface, blurred, distorted, but straining as though they could emerge if only the barrier thinned a little more. Eyes wide with longing, mouths open in endless inhale. And if you look too long, those faces begin to align with your own, until you are not sure whether you are looking at strangers or at the forgotten versions of yourself, desperately trying to breathe again. The breaths of the forgotten are not merely haunting, they are invitations. Each inhale is a beckoning. Each exhale is a promise. There is more of you than you know, more lives than you have lived. And here, at this threshold, the question sharpens like a blade. Are you the one watching the forgotten breathe, or are you the forgotten one, reaching through the glass, begging your other self to remember you? For if the mirror remembers everything, perhaps you are not as whole as you believe. Perhaps you too are just one breath among many, waiting for the chance to return. At first, the mirror only breathed. A fog here, a sigh there, lonely fragments drifting from a world beyond. But then, one night, when silence wrapped the room so tightly that even your heartbeat felt intrusive, the breaths began to synchronize. They did not remain scattered, fragmented. They converged. The sound was faint at first, no louder than leaves rustling in windless air, yet it grew undeniable. The mirror was no longer a single presence exhaling. It was a gathering, a host, a multitude. The forgotten breaths overlapped, folded, interlaced, until they became not just noise but something far more deliberate. They became a chorus. It was not music in the way we understand it. No harmony, no melody, no rhythm that could be notated. Yet it carried weight, structure, and intention. Imagine hundreds of voices whispering at once, some high, some low, some breaking into laughter, some trembling with weeping, until their contradictions aligned into one overwhelming wave, a sound too vast to hold yet too intimate to escape. When the chorus begins, it does not speak to your ears. It speaks to your marrow. You feel it vibrate along the length of your spine, humming inside the hollow of your skull. Words do not form, not directly, but meanings arrive like sudden storms of recognition. Thoughts, not your own bloom inside your mind, fully formed, as though whispered by invisible tongues. And the meanings are not random. The chorus carries messages, warnings, confessions, demands, fragments of countless lives pressing against you at once, desperate to be known. They tell you of their joys, their regrets, their hungers. They pour visions into you, burning cities, forgotten forests, nights of solitude, mornings of reunion, endless deaths and endless rebirths. Their voices collapse into one another until you can no longer tell which belong to strangers and which belong to versions of yourself you have never lived. The weight of it is unbearable. To hear so many at once is to lose your footing. You are pulled into them like an ocean current, for every voice carries not just sound but gravity, and when enough gather, they pull you into their tide. There are stories, whispered accounts of those who endured the chorus too long. They began to repeat words they never learned, languages that belonged to no culture, no history. They spoke in overlapping tones, multiple voices breaking from one throat. To listen too long was to become a mouthpiece for the forgotten. a vessel through which they might spill back into the world. And yet, in that overwhelming chaos, there is a pattern, a single thread woven through the multitude. If you focus, if you let yourself drown deep enough, you can hear it. One voice louder than the rest, not in volume but in clarity, a voice that seems to know you, to know everything you hide, everything you crave, everything you fear. This voice is not part of the multitude. It is the anchor, the conductor, the one shaping the chorus. Who is it? Some say it is the truest self, the version of you that has lived all possibilities and now calls you home. Others say it is not you at all, but something ancient and merciless, a keeper of the mirror who speaks through the mouths of the forgotten. Whatever it is, once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. It speaks directly into the hollow of your soul, and its words echo long after the chorus has faded. But the most terrifying part is this: the chorus does not fade because it ends. It fades because it has chosen what it wanted, and sometimes what it wants is you. For when the voices fall silent and you look again into the mirror, you notice something impossible. Your reflection is still breathing, its lips are still moving. It continues to whisper, though you stand utterly still, and you understand too late that you have been added to the song, that you are now one of the echoes woven into the endless chorus beneath the glass. And so, we arrive at the threshold where reflection becomes question, and question becomes terror. The mirror stands silent now, its surface calm, innocent, as though none of this ever happened, yet you know better. You can feel it deep within you. That faint rhythm in your breath that doesn't quite belong, that lingering whisper that curls at the edge of thought, waiting for the moment you let your guard slip. The mirror does not end when you look away. It follows. In glass windows, in dark screens, in pools of water, it waits, patient, tireless, because the truth is simple and unbearable. It does not need you to find it. It has already found you. Perhaps tonight, when you stand before the mirror in your own home, you will notice something small, a pause too long, a blink too late, a breath forming against the glass when your lips are perfectly still. You will tell yourself it's nothing, of course, a trick of light, a wandering thought. But deep down, you will feel it, that tug, that pull, that quiet invitation to step closer, and maybe you will listen. Maybe you will dare, but remember this, the mirror remembers everything, and once it whispers your name, it never forgets. Sleep well tonight. If you can,